So the time after you've performed your final note at a gig is absolutely critical to your success and longevity as an artist, band, or musician. And there are 7 utterly horrible things that you should never do after a gig if you want to be successful. And in this video, I'm going to tell you all about them. So let's get to it. Hey, and welcome to Music Space, where we help working musicians just like you learn how to quickly and easily make a living with your craft. So if you're new here to the channel, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded. Now, right before we get into this video, if you're an artist or a musician looking to make some serious passive income and grow a significant fan base, I'm advising all musicians and artists like this to start a YouTube channel today. And that's because YouTube remains the biggest opportunity for musicians and artists growth in terms of growing a fan base and gaining significant income. And that's why I created the YouTube QuickStart course. This course is designed to get you up and running and making money and growing a fan base on YouTube really quickly and easily. And the best part is it's completely free and you can get instant access to it at the link in the description of this video. Okay, so the first worst thing that you can do after a gig is not correct mistakes. So what happens on a lot of these current gigs that we take is that we accept them a lot of times last minute and we don't have time to necessarily go through all of the music thoroughly. So we're probably just giving it a good once over, twice over, making sure we got the changes and stuff down, and then we go play the gig. So what happens is we never really thoroughly learn the music. So when we're performing it, we don't really perform it, confidently and like we know it thoroughly. And the problem with that is we do these types of gigs so much, we have all of this music in our heads and that we've learned that we really haven't learned. But that time after you've played that gig is a huge opportunity to go back and correct and learn those songs thoroughly and correct the mistakes that you made on the gig. And this is really just about being proactive and not waiting until you have to perform this music somewhere to go through it. Go through it when you don't have a gig. And another really horrible thing that you should absolutely not do after a gig is not rest your ears. And this is especially the case if you play in a lot of bands and a lot of venues that are really loud and you're using monitors and wedges and not in-ears, but this also applies to musicians who use in-ears as well. What happens on these events and gigs is that music and these loud sounds, even in in-ear monitors, are pumping through our ears for hours and hours on end, or at least extended periods of time. And that's something that could really wreak havoc on your hearing. I hear from a lot of musicians and artists all the time, and not just older musicians who've been in the game a long time who you would kind of expect to have those sort of problems, but even younger musicians whose hearing has been damaged and it hasn't been corrected because they didn't take the time to rest their ears. So when you spent all of this time at a gig with all of that loud music and sometimes ear-piercing sounds that, these high frequency sounds and stuff pumping in your ears from monitors or in-ear monitors, you need to rest your ears. Now, another horrible thing that you should never do after a gig is not follow up with the people who hired you. And this is something that's just one of these good industry hacks that, help professional musicians and people who get gigs all of the time stand out. So no matter how many times you've played at a particular venue or for a particular client or whatever, it's good practice to follow up with them after you've done the thing that you're doing for them, the gig. And all you're really doing here is just reaching out and saying, hey, thanks for having us at your venue, or thanks for hiring us for your event, and we hope everything was to your liking. Please let us know if it wasn't, and please think about hiring us again in the future for your future events. I can't tell you how so many solid relationships with clients have been built for just doing simple things like that and letting them know that you're concerned about what it is that you did for them. And again, this is just something that's really good practice, and it's absolutely a mistake not to do it. And then following that, another really horrible thing that you should never do after a gig is leave that gig without making some connections. And this is one of these things that I find that a lot of musicians and bands don't get follow-up gigs because they don't make these connections. It's almost always the case, no matter where you're playing, even if it's, a club or some hole-in-the-wall place or whatever, there's always people there that you can make connections with that would probably be interested in hiring you for something that they have coming up in the future. And this is why I'm a big advocate for doing these types of things on your band breaks. Don't just use your band breaks to go to the bathroom. If you have extra time, go connect with some of the people at the table and walk up and say, hey, we hope you guys are enjoying the band. My name is such and such, and if you ever need a band, let us know. And in almost every case, when you do something like that, their response is going to be, hey, do you have a card? Or hey, can I get your contact? And making a habit of making these types of connections with people is a good thing because you never know who's sitting in the audience. A lot of times it's somebody who could hire you for some big event that's going to pay major money. Now, another huge mistake, and this is huge. One thing you should never do after your gig is handle band issues. Now, let me be clear about what I'm saying. Of course, there are some things that are probably better handled like right after the gig that you can deal with, like minor issues. But the things I'm talking about are these things that happen on stage where there's some animosity between band members, or like you've gotten into some kind of fight, and these things are typical, right? They happen. And if it's some stuff like that that's happening, you should never handle that stuff right after the show. It's almost always the case that it's better to just let things cool down for a while, give it a day or two, and then come back to these issues and address them with cooler heads. Having these sort of disagreements and fights and arguments, and sometimes they even get physical. Doing that kind of stuff after a show, especially in a public place, that's not a good look for your band. We get heated about this stuff on stage that happens, that's going on sometimes, and it's best to just chill out for a little while and let that stuff cool off and come back to it and handle it at a later time. Now, another thing that you should never do after a gig is not make sure you have all of your equipment. So how many times have you walked off from a gig and left a power strip, an instrument cable, guitar cable, or something, a bag that you had, or an iPad or something like that? And then you get home and figure out you don't have that stuff, and then you have to go through the headache of trying to go back to the venue, and they're probably closed at that point. So you have to wait till the next day, but you also have a gig the next day in which you need the equipment that you left. It's just a really huge hassle, right? And that's a best case scenario, because in some instances, you can show back up to that venue to pick up your stuff and it's no longer there. Sometimes our equipment mysteriously grows legs and just walks off. So it's always good practice to not just always rush out of a gig, but sit and take some time to double check to make sure you have everything that you brought there with you. Now, another horrible thing, guys, and this is something that is truly really serious that you should never do after a gig. Don't drive under the influence. So, it's not uncommon for a lot of us musicians to have a few drinks at our gigs, especially the party types of gigs and the holiday types of gigs and things like that, where drinking is the thing. And all of that is cool and it's fine, but we really got to make sure, guys, that we don't let ourselves drive under the influence of alcohol, and we don't let our fellow band members do that as well. We all know of at least one musician or one person that has left some sort of gig like that and got into some sort of accident by either themselves being under the influence or someone else being under the influence. So the more we can cut down on stuff like that, the more musicians we continue to have in this circle, and we don't lose them for, silly things like being under the influence of alcohol. So, of course, I'm not saying don't have fun and don't have some drinks. Again, we all have a few here and there, but coming up to like the holidays and, that time of year where a lot of that stuff gets rampant and, safety becomes an issue, just be sure to do that responsibly and drink responsibly. And of course, there are a lot of other sort of best practices that we should do and adhere to at our gigs. And I've done quite a few videos about them, and you can check those out right here, right now.